On a rain-drenched Manhattan street, Roman DeLuca, a mafia boss whose name could silence a room, found the one thing his empire couldn't control, a woman who didn't know she was supposed to fear him. Elena Voss sat crumpled on the wet pavement, crying soundlessly, so shattered she couldn't even pretend to be whole. He should have walked past. He had walked past 1,000 broken things before, but something in her stillness stopped the most dangerous man in New York cold. What began as a single moment of unexpected mercy would unravel everything Roman thought he knew about power, loyalty, and the cost of letting someone in. If you want to see how a man who owned the city lost his heart to a woman who owned nothing, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday night, turning Manhattan streets into rivers of neon and oil. Roman DeLuca stood under the awning of a closed bodega on 7th Avenue, watching the chaos with the detached interest of a man who had seen every variation of human misery. Water hammered the pavement. Taxis hissed past, spraying filthy waves onto the sidewalk. Somewhere a car alarm bleated uselessly into the storm. He had sent his driver home an hour ago. Sometimes Roman needed to walk, needed to feel the city's pulse without the buffer of bulletproof glass and leather seats. Tonight was one of those nights. A deal had gone sideways earlier, not catastrophically, but enough to leave a sour taste. One of his lieutenants had gotten greedy, started skimming. Roman had handled it the way he always did, swiftly, quietly, and with enough ruthlessness that the message would echo through every level of his organization. The problem was solved. The man would never steal again. But Roman felt nothing about it. Not satisfaction, not regret. Just the familiar emptiness that came after exercising the only kind of power he truly understood. He pulled his coat tighter and stepped back into the rain. That was when he saw her. She was sitting on the sidewalk outside a shuttered electronics store, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own pieces together. Her clothes were soaked through, a thin jacket that offered no real protection, jeans dark with water. Her hair hung in wet strings around her face, but it was the way she cried that stopped him. Silently. No sobs, no gasping breaths. Just tears mixing with rain. Her shoulders shaking in a rhythm that spoke of exhaustion so deep it had gone past despair into something more final. Roman slowed. He had walked past plenty of people in distress. This city was full of them. You couldn't stop for every lost soul, or you'd never get anywhere. But something about this woman held him in place. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't look up when he stopped a few feet away, didn't register his presence at all. Most people felt it when Roman DeLuca stood near them, some instinct in their hindbrain that screamed danger, but she just sat there staring at nothing, crying like the world had already ended. "You okay?" The words came out rougher than he intended. She flinched, her head snapped up, and for the first time he saw her face clearly, mid-20s maybe, pale. Eyes red and swollen. But beneath the exhaustion and tears, there was something striking about her. A delicate bone structure, full lips, dark eyes that might have been beautiful if they weren't so utterly hollow. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." She blinked at him, and he saw her trying to process his presence, trying to decide if he was a threat. She clearly didn't recognize him, which was unusual. Roman's face wasn't famous in the tabloid sense, but in certain circles, the circles that mattered, everyone knew who he was. "I said I'm fine." She turned her face away, dismissing him. Roman should have left. He had a dozen things waiting for his attention. Phone calls to make, plans to finalize, an empire that never stopped demanding his focus. And yet he didn't move. "When's the last time you ate?" She didn't answer. "When's the last time you slept?" Still nothing. Roman exhaled through his nose. This was stupid. She was a stranger. She clearly didn't want help. And he had learned a long time ago that trying to save people who didn't want to be saved was a waste of time. But then she shivered, a violent, full-body tremor that made her teeth chatter, and something in his chest twisted. "Come on." He heard himself say it before he'd made the conscious decision to speak. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here. You need to get warm." "I don't need anything from you." But even as she said it, another shiver racked through her. "I'm not offering charity. I'm stating a fact. You're hypothermic. If you stay out here, you're going to end up in the hospital, or worse. She looked up at him again, and this time there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Wariness, maybe. Or just the faint spark of survival instinct. Why do you care? It was a fair question. Roman didn't have a good answer. I don't, he said, but I'm hungry, and I hate eating alone. So if you want to sit in a warm place for an hour and have a meal, the offer's there. If not, I'll leave you alone. It was the casualness of it that seemed to reach her. Not pity, not pressure, just a transaction that cost her nothing. After a long moment, she nodded. The diner was one of those all-night places that smelled like burnt coffee and frying oil. Roman had eaten in worse places. He'd also eaten in Michelin-starred restaurants where a single appetizer cost more than most people made in a week. The difference didn't matter much to him anymore. He steered them to a booth in the back corner. Habit made him choose seats with a clear view of the entrance, and slid in across from her. She looked even worse under the fluorescent lights. Her skin was waxy, her lips faintly blue. She was shaking so hard she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. A waitress appeared, looking tired and bored. "What can I get you?" "Coffee," Roman said. "2, and bring a couple of those blankets from the back if you've got them." The waitress raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She disappeared and came back a minute later with 2 steaming mugs and a thin fleece blanket that had seen better days. Roman took it and handed it to the woman across from him. "Thanks," she whispered. She wrapped it around her shoulders and hunched forward over the coffee, letting the steam rise into her face. They sat in silence for a while. Roman didn't push. He'd learned long ago that silence was often more effective than words. People filled it eventually. After a few minutes, she took a sip of coffee and seemed to come back to herself a little. The shaking slowed. Some color returned to her face. "I'm Elena," she said quietly. "Roman." She nodded, like the name meant nothing to her. And maybe it didn't. Not everyone moved in circles where his reputation preceded him. "What happened?" he asked. She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You really want to know?" "I asked, didn't I?" She studied him for a long moment like she was trying to decide if he was real. Then she sighed. "I left someone," she said. "Someone I should have left a long time ago." Roman waited. "He never hit me," Elena continued, her voice flat. "People always think that's the line, right? Like if there's no bruises, it doesn't count. But he didn't need to hit me. He had other ways." Roman knew exactly what she meant. He'd seen it before. Different contexts, same mechanics. Control didn't always come with fists. "He decided everything," Elena said. "What I wore, where I went, who I talked to. At first it felt like he cared, like he was just protective. But it got smaller and smaller until I couldn't breathe without asking permission." She stared down into her coffee. "I finally got out 3 days ago, packed a bag while he was at work and just ran. And tonight I realized I have nowhere to go. I've been staying at a shelter, but it's full. They turned me away. I have $43 to my name and no one I can call." She looked up at him, and the rawness in her eyes was almost painful to witness. So I sat down on that sidewalk and thought, this is it. This is what rock bottom looks like. Roman didn't tell her it could get worse. She didn't need to hear that. "You have family?" he asked. "No, my parents died when I was 19. Car accident. I have an aunt in Oregon, but we haven't spoken in years." She wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. "He isolated me from everyone. I didn't even realize it was happening until it was done." "Friends?" A bitter smile. "He made sure I didn't have those either." Roman sat back and studied her. Elena Voss was a stranger. Her problems were not his problems. He had built his life on the principle of not getting involved in things that didn't serve his interests. Sentiment was a weakness. Attachments were leverage points his enemies could exploit. And yet, "You need a place to stay," he said. "I'll figure something out." "I'm not asking. I'm telling you, I have an apartment, a penthouse, actually. It's empty most of the time. You can stay there." Elena's eyes widened. I'm not asking for anything," Roman said, cutting her off. "You need somewhere safe. I have space. That's all this is. Why would you do that? You don't even know me." It was another fair question. Roman still didn't have a good answer. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him without fear. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't recognized his name. Or maybe it was something else entirely, some impulse he didn't understand and didn't particularly want to examine. "Does it matter?" he said. She stared at him for a long time. He could see her mind working, weighing risks, calculating odds. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." "What?" The penthouse was in Tribeca, 37th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. Roman unlocked the door and stepped aside to let Elena in first. She moved slowly, like she was walking through a dream. The place was modern and sparse. Expensive furniture, high-end appliances, not much in the way of personal touches. Roman didn't spend a lot of time here. It was a place to sleep, occasionally eat, and conduct business when he needed privacy. It wasn't a home. "Guest bedroom's down the hall," he said, pointing. "Bathroom's attached. There's clothes in the closet. Previous tenant left some things. Might not fit perfectly, but it's better than what you've got." Elena turned to face him. "I don't understand why you're doing this." "You don't have to understand it. Are you going to want something? Later, I mean. Are you going to—" "No." Roman's voice was flat. "I'm not that guy. You're safe here. I'm not going to touch you, pressure you, or expect anything from you. Clear?" She studied his face, and he let her. Whatever she was looking for, she must have found it, because she nodded again. "Okay. Get some sleep," Roman said. "We'll talk in the morning." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Roman?" He looked back. "Thank you." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and left. That's... Roman didn't sleep much that night. He sat in his office, a room at the opposite end of the penthouse from where Elena was sleeping, and stared at financial reports without really seeing them. His mind kept circling back to the woman down the hall. This was a mistake. He knew that. Bringing a stranger into his home, into his space, it violated every rule he'd set for himself. Attachments were dangerous. People were leverage. The moment you cared about someone, you gave your enemies a target. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Elena sitting on that wet sidewalk, crying without sound, and something in him refused to let it go. His phone buzzed. A text from Marco, his second-in-command. Everything handled, clean. Roman typed back a quick acknowledgement and set the phone down. The business never stopped. There was always another deal, another threat, another fire to put out. That was the price of power. He thought about Elena's ex, the man who had controlled her, isolated her, broken her down piece by piece without ever raising a fist. Roman had done worse things than that man ever dreamed of. He'd ordered people hurt, killed, erased. He didn't lose sleep over it, but there was something about using power to crush someone weaker, someone vulnerable, that struck him as particularly cowardly. Not that Roman considered himself a good man. He knew exactly what he was. But maybe, just for once, he could choose to be something other than what he'd always been. Basit. Morning came gray and cold. Roman made coffee and was halfway through his first cup when Elena appeared in the doorway. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt and yoga pants from the closet, both too big for her but clean and dry. Her hair was damp from a shower. She looked fragile and uncertain. "Morning," Roman said. "Morning." She hesitated. "I didn't know if I should... is it okay if I... It's your space now. You don't need permission to exist in it." She nodded and moved into the kitchen. Roman poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. She wrapped her hands around it, the gesture already familiar. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. "Better than I have in months." She paused. "I kept expecting to wake up and find out this was a dream or a trap." "It's not a trap." "I'm starting to believe that." She took a sip of coffee. "So what happens now?" Roman leaned against the counter. "That's up to you. You can stay here as long as you need. No conditions. But if you want to start rebuilding, I can help with that too." "Help how?" "I own a legitimate business, a consulting firm that handles logistics and acquisitions. It's clean, legal, profitable. I could use someone in the office, administrative work, client relations, whatever you're good at. It's not charity. You'd be earning a paycheck." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you really do, Roman?" So she wasn't stupid. Good. "I run a lot of businesses," he said carefully. "Some of them are more complicated than others, but the firm I'm offering you a job at is completely legitimate. You wouldn't be involved in anything illegal. But you are. It wasn't a question. Roman met her gaze. Yes. She absorbed that. He waited for her to run, to panic, to make excuses and leave. Instead, she just nodded slowly. Okay. I don't have a lot of options right now, Elena said. And you've been honest with me. That's more than I can say for most people I've known. So, okay, I'll take the job. But I need you to promise me something. What? That you'll keep being honest. I've had enough of men who lie to control me. I'm not your ex, Roman said, his voice hard. I know, but I need to hear you say it. I promise I'll be honest with you. Elena searched his face, then nodded. Then we have a deal. Heck. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Roman with its normalcy. Elena started at the consulting firm, working under Roman's office manager, a sharp woman named Patricia who took Elena under her wing without asking questions. Elena was good at the work, detail-oriented, quick to learn, professional with clients. She showed up early and stayed late, and Roman got the sense she was grateful for something to focus on. At the penthouse, they orbited each other carefully. Roman was gone most evenings, handling the parts of his empire that required his direct attention. When he was home, they were polite, distant. Elena cooked sometimes. Simple meals that she left in the fridge with post-it notes, made extra if you're hungry. Roman found himself eating them more often than he ate anything else. He told himself it was just practical, efficient, nothing more. But then there was the night he came home at 2 a.m. and found Elena sitting on the couch in the dark, staring out at the city lights. Can't sleep? He asked. She jumped, startled. Sorry, I didn't hear you come in. You okay? She shrugged. Nightmares. Roman understood nightmares. He poured himself a drink and sat down in the chair across from her, leaving space between them. You want to talk about it? He asked. Not really. She pulled a blanket tighter around herself. It's just, I keep dreaming that he finds me, that I wake up and I'm back there, and none of this was real. He's not going to find you. You don't know that? I do, actually. Roman took a sip of his drink. I had someone look into him. He's not looking for you. He's already moved on. Elena's head snapped toward him. You did what? I ran a background check, made sure he wasn't a threat. Roman kept his voice level. You're safe, Elena. That's not just a guess. It's a fact. She stared at him, and he couldn't read her expression. Then slowly her shoulders sagged. I don't know if I should be angry that you invaded my privacy or relieved that he's not coming after me. You can be both. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You're kind of a strange person, Roman. I've been called worse. They sat in silence for a while, the city glittering below them like a field of fallen stars. Why did you really bring me here? Elena asked quietly. And don't tell me it was just because you had space. I've been around liars long enough to know when someone's not telling the whole truth. Roman considered his answer carefully. The truth was complicated. The truth was that he didn't fully understand his own motivations, but he'd promised her honesty. I don't know, he said finally. I saw you on that sidewalk, and something in me couldn't walk away. Maybe I'm getting soft. Maybe I wanted to prove I could do something decent for once. Or maybe... He paused. Maybe I just didn't want you to disappear. Elena looked at him for a long moment. I don't disappear that easily. Good. She smiled, a real smile this time, small but genuine, and Roman felt something shift in his chest, something dangerous and unfamiliar. He finished his drink and stood. Try to get some sleep. You too. As he walked to his room, Roman told himself he was just being practical. Elena needed protection, and he could provide it. That was all this was. But he was a good liar, and he knew when he was lying to himself. 3 weeks in, things changed. Roman had a situation brewing, a rival family moving in on territory that had been his for years. It required delicate handling, the kind of negotiation that was half diplomacy and half veiled threat. He was in the middle of a tense phone call when Elena knocked on his office door. He held up a finger, signaling her to wait, and finished the conversation. When he hung up, she was still standing there, looking uncertain. What's wrong? He asked. Nothing's wrong. Patricia asked me to bring you these contracts. She held out a folder. Roman took it, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Thanks. She didn't leave. Something else? He prompted. Elena bit her lip. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever regret it? The things you've done, I mean. The life you've built? It was a hell of a question. Roman leaned back in his chair. No, he said. I don't regret it. I made choices. I live with them. But it must be lonely, all that power and no one to share it with. Roman studied her. You worried about me, Elena. Maybe. She crossed her arms. You've been kind to me. Kinder than you had to be. I guess I just wonder if anyone's ever been kind to you. It was such a simple observation, and it cut deeper than it should have. I don't need kindness, Roman said. I need control. I need people to do what I tell them. Kindness is a luxury I can't afford. That sounds like something you've told yourself for so long you believe it's true. She was too perceptive. Roman didn't like it. What do you want me to say? He asked, his voice harder now. That I'm secretly a good man who just needs the right woman to save him? This isn't a fairy tale, Elena. I'm not a hero. The things I've done would keep you up at night if you knew half of them. I'm not asking you to be a hero, Elena said quietly. I'm just saying maybe you don't have to be alone all the time. Before Roman could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Marco. Urgent. I have to take this. Elena nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Roman answered the call, but his mind was only half on the conversation. The other half was replaying Elena's words. Maybe you don't have to be alone all the time. The problem was, he did. Being alone kept him sharp. Being alone kept him safe. He'd built his entire life on that principle. So why did it suddenly feel like the loneliest thing in the world? A month after Elena moved in, Roman made the mistake of taking her to a business dinner. It wasn't supposed to be anything significant, just a meeting with a legitimate partner, a real estate developer looking to collaborate on a project. Roman needed to present a certain image, successful, respectable, connected. Having Elena there, polished, professional, clearly intelligent, would reinforce that image. At least that's what he told himself. The dinner went well. Elena was charming without being over the top, asked smart questions, laughed at the right moments. The developer was impressed. Roman closed the deal. Afterward, in the car on the way back to the penthouse, Elena was quiet. You okay? Roman asked. That was strange, she said. Strange how? I felt like I was playing a part, like I was supposed to be something I'm not. You were yourself. No. I was the version of myself you needed me to be. She looked at him. Is that what this is? I'm just useful? Roman felt something tighten in his chest. That's not what I meant. I brought you because I thought you'd enjoy getting out, that's all. Did you? Or did you bring me because I make you look good? It was too close to the truth, and Roman didn't have a good answer. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable and heavy. When they got back to the penthouse, Elena went straight to her room without saying goodnight. Roman poured himself a drink and stood at the window, staring out at the city. He'd fucked up. He knew that. But he didn't know how to fix it. The next morning, he found a note on the kitchen counter. I need some space. I'll be at work, but I'm going to stay with a friend for a few days. Thank you for everything, but I think we both need to figure out what this is before it becomes something neither of us intended. Roman crumpled the note in his fist. He didn't have friends. Elena didn't have friends. She'd said as much herself. So where the hell was she going? He pulled out his phone and called Marco. I need you to find someone. Who? Elena Voss. She left this morning. Track her down. There was a pause on the other end. Boss, you sure that's a good idea? Just do it. 2 hours later, Marco called back. She's at a women's shelter on the Lower East Side. Looks like she's volunteering there, not staying. Roman hung up and stared at his phone. She wasn't running from him. She was rebuilding, on her own terms. And he had almost ruined it by treating her like an accessory. He didn't go after her. Instead, he gave her the space she'd asked for. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5. On the 6th day, Elena came home. She walked into the penthouse at 7 in the evening, looking tired but steady. Roman was in the kitchen, pretending he hadn't been waiting. Hey, she said. Hey. She set her bag down. Can we talk? Yeah. They sat across from each other at the dining table, the space between them feeling both vast and fragile. "I'm sorry," Elena said. "I overreacted." "No, you didn't. I used you. Maybe I didn't mean to, but I did." She shook her head. "You gave me a job, a place to live. You didn't owe me anything, and you still helped. I shouldn't have thrown that back in your face." "Elena, let me finish." She took a breath. "I've spent so long being controlled, being told what to think and feel, that I'm hypersensitive to it now. I saw you bringing me to that dinner, and all I could think was, he's just like him, he's using me. But you're not. I know that. I panicked." Roman reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond a brief brush of fingers, and the contact sent a jolt through him. "I'm not him," Roman said, "and I'll prove that to you, however long it takes." Elena's eyes glistened. "You don't have to prove anything." "Yeah, I do." They sat there, hands clasped, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable, and for the first time since she'd walked into his life, Roman let himself admit the truth he'd been avoiding. He cared about her, not because she was useful, not because she made him look good, but because when she smiled, something in him that had been frozen for years started to thaw, and that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. The weeks that followed were different. Roman stopped pretending this was just charity or convenience. He made time to have dinner with Elena, to ask about her day, to listen when she talked about the things she wanted to do with her life. She was smart, ambitious, creative, all the things her ex had tried to bury. Watching her come back to life was like watching spring return after a brutal winter. And somewhere along the way, Roman stopped thinking of the penthouse as just a place to sleep. It started to feel like home. One night, they were watching an old movie, something Elena had picked, a black and white noir with sharp dialogue and doomed romance. Roman wasn't paying much attention to the screen. He was watching Elena, the way the light from the television played across her face, the way she tucked her legs under herself on the couch, completely absorbed. "You're staring," she said without looking at him. "Am I?" "Yes." She glanced over and there was something playful in her expression. "Why?" "Just thinking." "About what?" Roman hesitated. The truth felt too raw, too exposing, but he'd promised her honesty. "About how different things are now," he said, "since you've been here." "Different how?" "Better." Elena's smile was soft, almost shy. "Yeah, for me too." They sat in silence for a moment, the movie playing in the background, forgotten. "Roman?" "Yeah?" "What are we doing?" It was the question he'd been avoiding, the question that had no easy answer. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't want it to stop." Elena turned to face him fully. "I don't either. But I need you to understand something. I can't be someone's possession. Not again. If this, whatever this is, becomes that, I'll leave. I don't care how much I care about you. I'll leave." "I know." "Do you?" "Because I think part of you is used to owning things, controlling things, and I need you to see me as more than something you can control." Roman met her gaze. "I see you, Elena. I see exactly who you are, and I don't want to control you. I want—" He struggled to find the words. "I want you to choose me, not because you need me, but because you want to." Her breath caught. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then slowly, she leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, testing. Roman froze, caught off guard by the surge of emotion that flooded through him. Then he kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her face, and everything else fell away. When they finally pulled apart, Elena rested her forehead against his. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too. What if this ruins everything? What if it doesn't?" She laughed, a small, breathless sound. "You're an optimist now. You're a bad influence." She kissed him again, and this time there was no hesitation. Just the two of them, tangled together on the couch, the movie forgotten, the world outside the windows fading into irrelevance. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Roman felt something other than the cold weight of power. He felt alive. The morning after their first kiss, Roman woke to the smell of coffee and something burning. He pulled on a t-shirt and walked into the kitchen to find Elena standing at the stove, staring down at a pan of what might have once been scrambled eggs, but now looked like something scraped off a battlefield. "I can't cook," she announced without looking up. "I noticed. I really can't cook. This was supposed to be breakfast." It turned into a crime scene. Roman moved to stand beside her and peered into the pan. "Yeah, those eggs are dead." Elena laughed, and the sound hit him square in the chest. She looked different this morning, lighter somehow, like she'd set down something heavy she'd been carrying too long. Her hair was messy, pulled back in a loose knot. She was wearing one of his old Columbia t-shirts that she must have found in the laundry, and it hung off one shoulder. She looked beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with polish or perfection. "I wanted to do something nice," she said. "You've done so much for me, and I thought maybe I could—" "Elena." He caught her hand. "You don't owe me anything." "I know, but I wanted to." She gestured at the ruined eggs. "Clearly, I'm bad at gratitude. Order takeout next time." She grinned. "Deal." They ended up eating toast and drinking coffee on the balcony, watching the city wake up below them. It was early November now, and the air had that sharp bite that promised winter wasn't far behind. Elena pulled a blanket around her shoulders and curled up in one of the chairs, her feet tucked under her. "What's today look like for you?" she asked. Roman shrugged. "Meetings? Nothing interesting." "Liar. You don't do boring meetings." She was right. He had a sit-down with the Castellano family scheduled for later, a delicate negotiation over shipping routes that could either strengthen an alliance or spark a war. But Elena didn't need to know that. "What about you?" he asked, deflecting. "Patricia wants me to shadow her on a client pitch, some tech startup looking for warehouse space." Elena took a sip of coffee. "I think she's testing me, seeing if I can handle more responsibility." "You can. You sound pretty confident." "I am. You're smart. You work harder than anyone else in that office. Patricia would be an idiot not to promote you." Elena looked at him, something soft in her expression. "You really believe that?" "Yeah, I do." She reached across the small table and laced her fingers through his. They sat like that for a while, not talking, just existing together in the cold morning air. Roman felt the weight of what they'd started last night settling over him. This wasn't just attraction. This wasn't just convenience. This was something real, something that could break him if he let it. But for once, he didn't pull away. The next few weeks moved fast. Too fast. Elena threw herself into work, proving Roman right when Patricia gave her a promotion to junior consultant. She started handling her own clients, building relationships, closing deals. She was good at it, better than good. She had a way of making people feel heard, of finding solutions that worked for everyone. It was the opposite of how Roman operated, and he found himself fascinated by watching her work. At night, they fell into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to domestic. They cooked together, or rather, Roman cooked while Elena kept him company and occasionally attempted to help before he gently steered her away from anything flammable. They watched movies, argued about books, stayed up too late talking about everything and nothing, and they kissed. A lot. But Roman never pushed for more, and Elena never asked why. The truth was, he was terrified. Terrified of moving too fast, of scaring her off, of wanting something so badly that losing it would destroy him. So he kept himself in check, even when every instinct screamed at him to take more. One night in late November, they were lying on the couch, Elena's head on his chest, some documentary playing that neither of them was watching. Roman was running his fingers through her hair, half lost in thought, when she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why haven't you tried to sleep with me?" Roman's hand stilled. "That's direct." "I'm serious. We've been, whatever this is, for almost a month now, and you've been nothing but respectful, which I appreciate. But sometimes I wonder if you're not attracted to me, or if you're just being careful, or I'm attracted to you." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Trust me, that's not the issue." "Then what is?" Roman was quiet for a long moment, trying to find the right words. "I don't want to rush you or pressure you. You've been through hell, and I don't want to be another man who takes what he wants without thinking about what you need." Elena pushed herself up on one elbow so she could look at him. "What if what I need is to stop being treated like I'm fragile?" "You're not fragile, but you're also not ready." "Don't tell me what I'm ready for." There was an edge to her voice now, something sharp and defensive. Roman sat up, creating space between them. "I'm not trying to control you," he said carefully. "Then stop making decisions for me. If I want to sleep with you, that's my choice, not yours." "I know that." "Do you? Because right now it feels like you're protecting me from myself, and I've had enough of that to last a lifetime." Roman ran a hand through his hair, frustration and something else, guilt, maybe, churning in his gut. "I'm trying to do the right thing here." "The right thing is trusting me to know my own mind." Elena's eyes were blazing now. "I'm not some broken thing you need to handle with kid gloves. I'm a grown woman who's capable of making her own choices. And if I want you, I get to have that. Unless you don't want me, in which case just say it." "Of course I want you." The words came out harsh, raw. "I think about you constantly. I can barely focus on anything else. But I'm scared, Elena. I'm scared that if I take this step, if I let myself have you, I won't be able to stop. And then if something goes wrong, if you leave..." He cut himself off, but it was too late. The truth was already out there, hanging between them. Elena's expression softened. She reached out and cupped his face in her hands. "I'm scared too. But I'm tired of letting fear run my life. Aren't you?" Roman closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Elena was still there, still looking at him like he was something worth fighting for. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I am." She kissed him, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. Roman pulled her into his lap, his hand sliding under her shirt, feeling the warmth of her skin. Elena made a small sound against his mouth, and something in him snapped. They barely made it to the bedroom. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dark, Elena's head on his chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns across his skin. Roman stared at the ceiling, trying to process the fact that everything had just changed. "You okay?" Elena asked softly. "Yeah. You?" "Better than okay." She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "Was it worth the wait?" Roman laughed, a low, rough sound. "Yeah, it was." They were quiet for a while. Then Elena shifted, propping herself up so she could see his face. "Can I tell you something?" "Anything." "I never thought I'd feel safe with someone again. After everything that happened, I convinced myself that being alone was safer than trusting anyone. But you..." She paused, searching for words. "You make me feel like I can breathe." Roman's chest tightened. "You make me feel like I'm not just the sum of the worst things I've done." "You're not." "I've done a lot of bad things, Elena." "I know, but you've also been kind to me. You've given me a chance to rebuild when you didn't have to. That counts for something." Roman wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that one good thing could outweigh years of darkness. But he knew better. The world he lived in didn't offer redemption. It only offered survival. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked. "That I don't deserve you." "Stop it. You don't get to decide what I deserve. That's my choice, remember?" He smiled despite himself. "You're stubborn." "I learned from the best." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in years, Roman didn't dream about violence or loss. He dreamed about waking up next to Elena every morning, about building something real with her, about a future that didn't end in blood. It was a dangerous dream, but he let himself have it anyway. What's it? The next morning, reality crashed back in. Roman was in his office at the penthouse going over reports from Marco when his phone rang. It was Castellano. "We have a problem," the older man said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that needs your attention, today." Roman glanced at the clock. He was supposed to meet Elena for lunch. "Can it wait?" "No." There was something in Castellano's tone that made Roman's instincts flare. "Where?" "The usual place." 1 hour. The line went dead. Roman sat back in his chair, tension already building in his shoulders. He texted Elena. "Something came up. Can't make lunch, sorry." Her reply came a minute later. "No worries, everything okay?" He typed back, "Yeah, just work." It was a lie, but a necessary one. Elena didn't need to know about this part of his life. He'd promised to keep her separate from the darkness, and he meant it. An hour later, Roman walked into a warehouse on the edge of the Bronx. It was one of Castellano's properties, a neutral ground where business could be conducted without attracting attention. Marco was already there, along with two of Castellano's men. They all looked tense. "What's going on?" Roman asked. Castellano emerged from the shadows, his face grim. "We've got a rat." Roman went still. "Who?" "One of my lieutenants. Been feeding information to the feds for 6 months." "You sure?" "Positive. My lawyers got wind of it this morning. There's an indictment coming down. Could be as early as next week." Roman's mind raced. If Castellano went down, it would destabilize half the East Coast operations. Alliances would fracture, territory would be up for grabs. And Roman's own business, both legitimate and otherwise, would be caught in the crossfire. "What do you need from me?" Roman asked. "Help me contain this. If the feds start digging, they might find connections that lead back to you. We need to clean house. Fast." Roman nodded. "I'll handle my end. But you need to plug the leak." "Already done." Castellano's expression was cold. "He won't be a problem anymore." Roman didn't ask what that meant. He didn't need to. They spent the next 2 hours going over details, strategizing, shoring up defenses. By the time Roman left the warehouse, the sun was setting and his phone was full of missed calls from Elena. He called her back as he slid into his car. "Hey," she answered. "You okay? You've been gone all day." "Yeah, sorry, things got complicated." "You want to talk about it?" "Not really." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay, you coming home soon?" "Yeah, give me an hour. I'll order dinner. Chinese?" "Sounds good." He hung up and leaned his head back against the seat. The weight of his double life pressed down on him. Elena thought he was a businessman with some gray area dealings. She didn't know about the bodies, the bribes, the constant threat of violence that lurked beneath every handshake. And he needed to keep it that way. But as he drove back toward Manhattan, Roman couldn't shake the feeling that he was living on borrowed time. Sooner or later, the two halves of his life would collide. And when they did, he wasn't sure which one would survive. The tension didn't ease over the next few days. Roman was gone more often, his meetings running late into the night. He tried to shield Elena from it, but she wasn't stupid. She noticed the strain in his face, the way he checked his phone constantly, the careful way he avoided certain conversations. One night, she confronted him. "What's going on, Roman?" They were in the kitchen. She was chopping vegetables for a salad while he nursed a glass of whiskey at the counter. "What do you mean?" "Don't do that. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about." She set the knife down and turned to face him. "You've been distant for a week. Something's wrong." "It's just work." "Bullshit." Roman looked at her, surprised by the sharpness in her voice. "I know you're keeping things from me," Elena continued. "And I get it. I don't expect you to tell me everything about your business. But I need to know if whatever's happening is going to blow back on me. On us." "It won't." "You can't promise that." She was right. He couldn't. Roman set his glass down and moved around the counter to stand in front of her. "There's a situation," he said carefully. "It's being handled, but it's complicated, and it's taking up a lot of my time. That's all I can tell you right now." "Is it dangerous?" "Potentially, but not for you." "What about for you?" Roman hesitated. The honest answer was yes. If Castellano's situation spiraled, if the feds started connecting dots, if one of a dozen other things went wrong, Roman could find himself in the crosshairs. But telling Elena that would only scare her. "I'm being careful," he said instead. Elena searched his face. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If this, whatever it is, gets bad, you'll tell me. You won't just disappear one day and leave me wondering if you're alive or dead." The fear in her voice cut through him. Roman pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "I promise," he said into her hair. "I'm not going anywhere." She held on to him tightly, and Roman wished he could make that promise mean something. But in his world, promises were just words, and words didn't stop bullets. Book. 2 weeks later, the indictments came down. 3 of Castellano's top people were arrested in a coordinated raid. The news broke on a Friday morning, and within hours, the whole underworld was buzzing. Roman spent the day fielding calls, shoring up alliances, making sure everyone knew he wasn't caught in the net. By the time he got home that night, he was exhausted. Elena was on the couch, watching the news coverage with a stricken expression. "Is this you?" she asked without looking up. "No." But you know these people. Elena, don't lie to me, Roman. I see your name in some of these articles. They're calling you an associate. Roman sat down beside her. I'm not involved in what they did. But yeah, I know them. In my world, you know everyone. Your world, she laughed bitterly. What exactly is your world, Roman? Because I'm starting to think I don't know anything about it. You know enough. Do I? Because those people on the news, they're going to prison. And you're telling me you're not like them, but you just admitted you're in the same circles. Her voice was rising now, edged with panic. How do I know you're not next? You don't. The bluntness of it seemed to shock her. Roman took her hand. I can't promise you I'm safe. I can't promise you none of this will ever touch me. But I can promise you I'm doing everything I can to keep you out of it. I don't want to be kept out of it. I want to know the truth. You sure about that? Elena pulled her hand away. Stop protecting me from reality. I'm not a child. Fine. You want the truth? I run operations that span half the eastern seaboard. Some of them are legitimate. Some of them aren't. I've made deals with people who would kill you without blinking if they thought it would hurt me. I've given orders that ended lives, and I sleep fine at night because in my world, it's kill or be killed. That's the truth, Elena. Still want to be here? He expected her to recoil, to pack her bags and leave. Instead, she just stared at him. Do you want me to leave? She asked quietly. No. Then stop trying to scare me off. She moved closer, her hand finding his again. I know who you are, Roman. Maybe not all the details, but I know. And I'm still here. So either trust me with that or let me go. But don't keep me in this weird middle ground where I'm supposed to pretend I don't see what's right in front of me. Roman looked at her. This woman who had come into his life broken and scared and had somehow become the strongest person he knew. She was right. She deserved better than half-truths and careful omissions. Okay, he said. No more middle ground. Okay. They sat in silence for a while, the news still playing in the background, reporting on a world that suddenly felt too close for comfort. Are you scared? Elena asked eventually. Of the feds? No, of losing you. Yeah. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You're not going to lose me. You can't know that. Neither can you, but we're here now, so let's just be here. It was such a simple thing to say, but it settled something in Roman's chest. He pulled her closer, and they stayed like that until the news cycle moved on to other tragedies, other scandals, other people's disasters. For now, they were safe, and that was enough. December came in cold and brutal, the kind of winter that made the city feel like a frozen wasteland. Roman had business in Chicago, a meeting that couldn't be postponed. He almost didn't invite Elena, but she'd been working so hard and he thought maybe a few days away would be good for both of them. Chicago in December, she said when he brought it up. Are you trying to freeze me to death? I'll keep you warm, she smirked. Is that a promise? Yeah. So they flew out on a Tuesday morning, first class. Elena pressed against the window, watching the landscape shift below them. She'd barely said anything since they left the penthouse, and Roman could feel the tension radiating off her. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I haven't been back to Chicago since I left. Roman had forgotten. Elena had mentioned once that she'd lived there before New York, before her ex. He'd never pressed for details. We don't have to stay long, he said. 2 days, max. It's fine, it's just a city. But he could tell it wasn't fine. And when they landed and checked into the hotel, a sleek high-rise downtown, Elena looked pale and drawn. That night, Roman's meeting ran late. By the time he got back to the hotel, it was past midnight. He expected Elena to be asleep, but instead he found her sitting on the floor of their room, her back against the bed, staring at nothing. Elena? She didn't respond. Roman crossed the room and crouched in front of her. Hey, what's wrong? I saw him, she whispered. Who? My ex. He was in the lobby, or someone who looked like him. I don't know. I panicked and came up here. Roman felt a cold fury settle over him. Did he see you? I don't think so. You sure it was him? I don't know. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Roman sat down beside her and pulled her against him. You're not losing your mind, but even if it was him, he can't hurt you. Not anymore. You don't know that. Yeah, I do, because if he tries, he'll have to go through me first. Elena looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. You'd do that? I'd do worse than that. She believed him. He could see it in her face. And maybe that should have scared her, but instead she just nodded and let him hold her until the shaking stopped. The next day, Roman made sure she wasn't alone. His meeting was in the afternoon, and he brought her with him, not into the room, but to a coffee shop across the street where she could wait. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than leaving her at the hotel. When the meeting ended, Roman came back to find Elena sitting at a corner table, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of her, staring out the window. You good? He asked, sliding into the seat across from her. Yeah, just thinking. About? About how much I've let fear run my life. I spent years afraid of him, and even now, even after everything, I'm still afraid. She looked at Roman. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Then don't be. It's not that simple. Yeah, it is. Fear only has power if you let it. Roman reached across the table and took her hand. You're stronger than you think, Elena. You've already survived the worst thing that could happen to you. Everything else is just noise. She smiled, a sad, fragile thing. When did you become an optimist? When I met you. They left Chicago the next morning, and Elena seemed lighter somehow, like she'd left something behind in that frozen city. On the plane ride home, she fell asleep with her head on Roman's shoulder, and he found himself thinking about the future for the first time in years. Not just survival, not just the next deal or the next threat, but an actual future. With her. It was a dangerous thought. But then again, everything about Elena was dangerous, and Roman had never been good at walking away from danger. They'd been back in New York for 3 days when everything changed. Roman was in a meeting with his accountants when Marco texted him. We have a situation. Your place. Now. He excused himself and made it back to the penthouse in 20 minutes. Marco was waiting in the lobby, his face tight with tension. What happened? Roman demanded. Someone's been following Elena. The world tilted. What? One of the security guys noticed it this morning. Black sedan, been tailing her for at least 2 days. Maybe longer. Roman's blood went cold. Where is she now? At the office. I've got 2 guys on her, but she doesn't know they're there. Who's behind it? Don't know yet. Could be the ex. Could be someone else. Roman's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. If it was Elena's ex, that was one kind of problem. If it was connected to his world, if someone had figured out she mattered to him, that was infinitely more dangerous. Get me everything, Roman said. Plates, driver, who they're working for. I want answers in the next 2 hours. Marco nodded and left. Roman stood alone in the penthouse, fury and fear warring inside him. He'd promised Elena she was safe. He'd promised nothing from his life would touch her. And now someone was watching her, tracking her movements, waiting for something. He pulled out his phone and called her. Hey, she answered, sounding cheerful. What's up? Where are you? At work. Why? I need you to come home. Now? Roman, I have a client call in 20 minutes. Cancel it. His voice came out harder than he intended. Please, just come home. There was a pause. You're scaring me. I know, I'm sorry, but I need you here. I'll explain when you get back. Okay, I'm leaving now. 20 minutes later, Elena walked through the door, and Roman could see the questions in her eyes before she even spoke. What's going on? He told her. Watched the color drain from her face as he explained about the car, the surveillance, the unknown threat. It's him, she said quietly. It has to be him. We don't know that yet. Who else would it be? Her voice was rising, edged with panic. I told you he wouldn't just let me go. I told you. Elena. Roman caught her shoulders. Look at me. We're going to handle this, but I need you to stay calm. Stay calm? Someone's been following me, Roman, watching me, and I didn't even know. I know, and I'm sorry. I should have had security on you from the beginning. Security? She pulled away from him. I don't want security. I want my life back. I want to stop looking over my shoulder every 5 seconds. I'm working on it. Are you? Because it feels like the more time I spend with you, the more complicated everything gets. The words hit harder than they should have. Roman knew she was scared, knew she was lashing out from a place of fear, but it still stung. You want to leave? He asked quietly. Elena's expression crumbled. No, I don't want to leave. I'm scared, Roman. I thought I was done being scared. He pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against him, her whole body shaking. They stood like that for a long time, Roman holding her while she cried, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. 2 hours later, Marco came back with information. The car belonged to a private investigation firm based in Chicago. And the client who'd hired them was exactly who Elena had feared. David Chen, her ex. Roman sat across from Elena at the dining table and watched her absorb the news. She'd gone very still, her face pale but composed. What does he want? She asked. According to the PI's preliminary report, he hired them to find you, to verify you were okay, and report back on your situation. That's all? That's what they say. Elena laughed, a harsh sound. He doesn't care if I'm okay. He wants to know if I'm alone, if I'm vulnerable, if he can... She trailed off, shaking her head. He can't touch you, Roman said. Not anymore. You keep saying that, but what are you going to do? You can't just make him disappear. Roman was quiet. The truth was, he could. One phone call, one favor called in, and David Chen would cease to be a problem. It wouldn't be the first time Roman had erased someone who posed a threat. But looking at Elena's face, he knew that wasn't what she needed. I'm going to talk to him, Roman said. Elena's eyes widened. What? I'm going to Chicago. I'm going to have a conversation with him, and I'm going to make it very clear that you're off limits. Roman, no, you can't. Yes, I can, and I will. He reached across the table and took her hand. This ends now, Elena. You've spent too long living in fear of this man. I'm going to take that fear away. What if he doesn't listen? He'll listen. There was something in Roman's voice, something cold and absolute, that made Elena shiver. She searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her nod slowly. Okay, but I'm coming with you. No. Roman, absolutely not. You're staying here where I know you're safe. He's my problem. I should be there. And you will be. But not in the room. Not face to face with him. Roman's grip tightened on her hand. I need you to trust me on this. Elena held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, but promise me you won't do anything you can't come back from. Roman didn't make promises he couldn't keep, so he just kissed her hand and said, I'll be back before you know it. Chicago was colder the second time around. Roman flew out alone, Marco staying behind to keep an eye on Elena. He'd arranged a meeting with David Chen under the guise of a business proposition, a developer interested in Chen's architecture firm. It was easy enough to set up. Men like Chen were always looking for the next big deal. They met at a restaurant in River North, expensive and quiet, the kind of place where conversations could be had without being overheard. Chen arrived 5 minutes late, wearing an expensive suit and the kind of practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was shorter than Roman expected, polished in a way that spoke of careful cultivation rather than natural confidence. Mr. DeLuca, Chen said, extending his hand. Pleasure to meet you. Roman shook it briefly and gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Chen's smile faltered slightly at the tone, but he sat. A waiter appeared, took their drink orders, and vanished. So, Chen said, leaning back in his chair, your assistant mentioned you're looking at properties in the West Loop. I have some excellent projects that might interest you. I'm not here about properties, Chen blinked. I'm sorry? I'm here about Elena Voss. The change in Chen's expression was immediate. The polished mask slipped, revealing something uglier underneath. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You hired a PI firm to track her. You've been watching her for weeks. Chen's jaw tightened. That's none of your business. It became my business the moment you started following the woman I love. The words were out before Roman could stop them, and for a second he was as surprised by them as Chen looked. But then the shock faded and Chen's face twisted into something mean. Love? He laughed. You think you love her? You don't even know her. I know enough. You know what she's let you see. But Elena's very good at playing the victim. Did she tell you she left me without a word? That she took things that belonged to me? She took her own life back. That's not theft. Chen leaned forward, his voice dropping. She was mine. We built a life together, and she just walked away like none of it mattered. Maybe it didn't. Maybe she finally realized you were suffocating her. I gave her everything, a home, security, purpose. You gave her a cage. Chen's face flushed with anger. Who the hell do you think you are? You don't know anything about our relationship. I know she spent 3 days crying on a sidewalk after she left you. I know she still has nightmares about being dragged back to you. I know you broke something in her that she's still trying to fix. Roman's voice was cold, controlled. And I know that if you ever come near her again, if you ever hire another PI, if you so much as think about her, I will destroy you. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Chen stared at him, trying to decide if Roman was serious. Roman let him look. Let him see exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. You can't just... I can, Roman interrupted. I know about your firm. I know about the shortcuts you've taken, the building codes you've skirted, the bribes you've paid to get permits pushed through. I know about the affair you had with your business partner's wife, the one you paid off to keep quiet. I know everything, Chen, and if you push me, I'll make sure everyone else knows too. Chen's face had gone from red to white. You're bluffing. Roman pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a detailed report. Financial records, emails, photographs. All the proof he'd need to ruin Chen's career and reputation. Chen stared at the phone, his hands shaking. When he looked up, the fight had drained out of him. What do you want? He asked quietly. I want you to leave Elena alone, permanently. No more PIS, no more calls or emails or surprise visits. You move on with your life and let her move on with hers. And if I do that, I'll forget this conversation ever happened. You'll never hear from me again. Chen swallowed hard. Fine. Say it. I'll leave her alone. I won't contact her. I'm done. Roman took his phone back and stood. Good. Because if I find out you've broken this agreement, if I hear so much as a whisper that you're anywhere near her, I won't bother with threats the second time. Do we understand each other? Chen nodded, looking smaller than when he'd walked in. Roman left the restaurant without looking back. Outside, the city was dark and cold, the wind cutting through his coat. He should have felt satisfied. He'd handled the problem. Elena was safe now, but all he felt was empty. He'd meant what he said in there. He loved her. Somewhere between that first night in the rain and now, Elena had become the most important thing in his world. And that terrified him more than any threat Chen could pose. Because loving someone meant you could lose them. And Roman had spent his entire adult life making sure he never cared about anything enough to feel that kind of loss. He pulled out his phone and called Elena. Hey, she answered immediately. How'd it go? It's done. He won't bother you again. You're sure? I'm sure. There was a pause. Roman, what did you do? Nothing permanent. Just had a conversation. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. He closed his eyes, exhausted suddenly. I'm catching the next flight home. I'll be back tonight. Okay, I'll wait up. You don't have to. I want to. When Roman hung up, he stood on the street corner for a long time, watching the city move around him. He'd crossed a line tonight, admitted something he'd never planned to admit, not even to himself. And now he had to live with the consequences. Elena was waiting when he got back to the penthouse, curled up on the couch, with a book she clearly wasn't reading. She jumped up the moment he walked in. Are you okay? She asked. Yeah? You? I've been worried. Roman set his bag down and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. She fit perfectly against him, her head tucked under his chin, her arms wrapped tight around his waist. It's over, he said into her hair. He's not going to come after you. How can you be sure? I just am. Trust me. She pulled back to look at him, studying his face. What did you say to him? The truth. That you're under my protection now. That if he wants to keep his life intact, he'll stay away from you. Roman, I didn't hurt him. I didn't threaten him with violence. I just made it clear that continuing to pursue you would be a very bad idea for him. Elena bit her lip. I should feel relieved. And I do. I hate that you had to do that. I hate that I needed you to do that. You didn't need me to. I chose to. Why? He could have deflected, could have given her some vague answer about doing the right thing or protecting what was his, but he'd already said it once tonight. Saying it again wouldn't make it any less true. Because I love you, Roman said. Elena's breath caught. For a long moment she just stared at him, her eyes wide and shining. You love me, she repeated, like she was testing the words. Yeah, I do. Since when? I don't know. Maybe since that first night. Maybe since you burned those eggs and laughed about it. Maybe since you called me out for trying to protect you from yourself. He cupped her face in his hands. I just know that I do, and I'm not good at this. I'm going to screw it up, but I need you to know that you matter to me more than anything else in my life. Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. I love you too. I think I have for a while. I was just too scared to say it. You don't have to be scared, not with me. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and full of everything they'd both been holding back. Roman kissed her back, pouring every ounce of what he felt into it, trying to show her what words couldn't quite capture. They made love that night with a new kind of urgency, like they were trying to prove to each other that this was real, that it mattered, that it was worth fighting for. And afterward, lying tangled together in the dark, Roman felt something shift in his chest, not the armor cracking, something deeper than that. It felt like hope. What? The next few weeks should have been perfect. Chen had backed off. Roman's people confirmed he'd fired the PI and hadn't made any attempts to contact Elena. The holidays were coming, and the city was lit up with that particular brand of December magic that made even Manhattan feel almost optimistic. But then the gossip started. It began small. A mention in a society column about Roman DeLuca being seen with an unidentified woman at a charity gala. A photograph of them leaving a restaurant together, Elena's hand in his. Nothing scandalous, nothing unusual. But in Roman's world, small things had a way of becoming big problems. The first person to say something directly was Sal Vittori, one of Roman's oldest associates. They were having drinks at a private club when Sal leaned in, his voice low. So, you got yourself a girl. Yeah. She know what you do? Some of it, Sal nodded slowly. People are talking. Let them talk. I'm just saying, might want to be careful. You know how this looks. Roman did know. In his world, relationships were leverage, attachments were weaknesses, and Roman had just handed every one of his enemies a weapon. But he didn't care. Or at least he told himself he didn't. The second wake-up call came from Marco. We need to talk, Marco said, showing up at the penthouse unannounced one afternoon while Elena was at work. About what? About the fact that half the families on the East Coast now know you're involved with someone, and they're asking questions. So? So it makes you vulnerable. It makes her a target. Marco's expression was grim. Boss, I get it. She's great. But you're putting both of you at risk here. I can protect her. Can you? What happens when someone decides the best way to hurt you is through her? What happens when you have to choose between keeping her safe and keeping your empire intact? Roman's jaw tightened. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. Then I'll make sure it doesn't. Marco shook his head. You're in deep. I just hope you know what you're doing. When Marco left, Roman stood at the window and stared out at the city. He'd built his empire on the principle of maintaining control at all costs. Never show weakness. Never give enemies an opening. Never care about anything more than you care about power. And now he'd broken every one of those rules. The third sign came from Elena herself. She came home from work one evening, her face tight with tension. Something happened today, she said. Roman looked up from his laptop. What? A woman came into the office. Said she was an old friend of yours. Wanted to meet me. Every muscle in Roman's body went tense. What was her name? Sophia something. She didn't give a last name. Sophia Marchetti, daughter of one of the most powerful families in New Jersey, and someone Roman had carefully avoided for years. What did she say? Nothing much, just that she'd heard about me and wanted to see what all the fuss was about. She was polite, but there was something underneath it, something that felt like a warning. Roman ran a hand through his hair. She was testing you, seeing if you're a threat. A threat to what? To me. To my position. In my world, relationships change the balance of power. People want to know if you're going to make me soft, distract me, turn me into something I'm not. Elena sat down across from him. And? Am I making you soft? Probably. Is that a bad thing? Roman thought about it. By every measure he'd used his entire adult life, yes. Being soft meant being vulnerable. Being vulnerable meant being weak, and being weak meant being dead. But looking at Elena, he couldn't bring himself to care. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe, but I don't want to give you up. Then don't. It's not that simple. People are watching us now, judging, looking for ways to use you against me. So we'll be careful. Careful might not be enough. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Then we'll deal with it, together. But I'm not walking away just because things got complicated. I've done enough running in my life. Roman squeezed her hand. This isn't what you signed up for. I signed up for you, all of you. That includes the complicated parts. She made it sound so simple, like love was enough to weather any storm. Roman wanted to believe that, but he'd seen too much, done too much, to trust in anything that fragile. Still, looking at her face, seeing the determination there, he found himself nodding. Okay, together. Together. That night they made plans. They'd be more discreet, keep their relationship quieter. Roman would increase security without making Elena feel like a prisoner. They'd navigate this the way they'd navigated everything else, carefully, honestly, together. It felt manageable, survivable, and for a few weeks, it even worked. Then came the night everything fell apart. Roman was at a meeting, one of those gatherings that happened every few months where the major families came together to discuss territory, settle disputes, and maintain the fragile balance that kept their world from descending into chaos. These meetings were always tense, always political, and Roman hated them. But attendance wasn't optional. He was midway through a negotiation over shipping routes when his phone buzzed. He ignored it the first time. The second time, he glanced down and saw Marco's name. The third time, Marco called. Roman excused himself and stepped into the hallway. This better be important, he said. It is. Someone grabbed Elena. The world stopped. What? She left work an hour ago. Never made it home. We found her car 3 blocks from the office. Door open. Purse still inside. She's gone, boss. Roman's mind went blank with rage and terror. Who? Don't know yet. No ransom call? No demands? Whoever took her is playing this smart. Find her. Roman's voice was barely recognizable. I don't care what it takes. You find her right now. We're trying, but boss, now Marco. He hung up and stood in the empty hallway, his hands shaking. Every instinct screamed at him to tear the city apart until he found her. But he forced himself to think, to strategize. Panic wouldn't help Elena. Only control would. He went back into the meeting, his face a mask of calm, and made his excuses. Business emergency. Had to leave. No one questioned it. Roman DeLuca didn't explain himself. The drive back to Manhattan was the longest 20 minutes of his life. His phone rang constantly. Marco with updates that led nowhere. Other associates calling to express concern or offer help. Roman ignored most of them. The only call he took was from Castellano. I heard, the old man said. You need anything, you call me. Find out who did this. I'm already asking around. Someone will know something. When they do, I want them alive. I want to have a conversation. Understood. By the time Roman got back to the penthouse, it was crawling with his people. Marco met him at the door. Anything? Roman demanded. We've got footage from a camera 2 blocks over. Black van. 3 men. They grabbed her quick, professional job. But one of them made a mistake. Dropped something. We're running it down now. How long? An hour, maybe 2. That's too long. I know, but we're moving as fast as we can. Roman pushed past him and into his office. He pulled up every contact he had, every favor he was owed, every piece of leverage he'd accumulated over the years. He made calls, sent messages, put the word out that anyone who helped find Elena would be rewarded beyond measure, and anyone who stood in his way would regret it. 2 hours turned into 3. 3 turned into 4. The sun started to rise and still nothing. Roman sat at his desk, staring at a photo of Elena on his phone. One he'd taken a few weeks ago when she'd been laughing at something stupid he'd said. She looked so happy in it, so alive. If something happened to her, if she was hurt because of him. He couldn't finish the thought. At 6 a.m, Marco finally burst through the door. "We found her." Roman was on his feet instantly. "Where?" "Warehouse in Red Hook. The crew that took her is holding her there. Looks like they're waiting for instructions." "How many?" "4 that we can see. Could be more inside." "Get everyone. We're going now." The warehouse was exactly the kind of place Roman expected. Isolated, industrial, easy to defend. But he didn't care about easy. He cared about getting Elena out alive. They surrounded the building, 10 of Roman's best men moving into position. Marco wanted to negotiate, to find out what the kidnappers wanted before making a move. Roman overruled him. "We go in hard. We end this fast. Anyone who gets in the way goes down." It was brutal and efficient. Roman's men breached the building from 3 sides simultaneously. There was gunfire. Brief, intense, and one-sided. 4 men went down in the first 30 seconds. Roman moved through the warehouse like a force of nature, his gun in his hand, Marco at his side. They cleared room after room until finally, in a small office at the back of the building, Roman found her. Elena was tied to a chair, her face bruised, her lips split. But she was alive. When she saw him, relief flooded her features. "Roman!" He was across the room in 2 seconds, cutting her free, pulling her into his arms. She was shaking, crying, holding on to him like she'd never let go. "I've got you," he said into her hair. "You're safe now. I've got you." They said they were going to... "It doesn't matter. They're gone. You're safe." Marco appeared in his doorway. "Boss, we need to move. Cops are probably on their way." Roman lifted Elena into his arms and carried her out of the warehouse. She buried her face against his chest, and he could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. They took her to a private doctor Roman trusted, someone who wouldn't ask questions. The doctor checked her over, bandaged her cuts, gave her something for the shock. She had bruises and cuts, but nothing permanent, nothing that wouldn't heal. But Roman knew the damage went deeper than that. Back at the penthouse, Elena sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. Roman sat beside her, not touching, just being there. "Who were they?" she finally asked. "Freelancers, hired to grab you and hold you until they got further instructions." "Instructions from who?" Roman hesitated. The truth would hurt, but he'd promised her honesty. "I don't know yet, but I will." "This is because of you, because of us." "Yeah," Elena nodded slowly. They told me that being with you was going to get me killed, that I was just leverage, a tool to control you." "They were wrong." "Were they?" "Because it feels like they were right." She looked at him, and the emptiness in her eyes broke something inside him. "I can't do this, Roman. I can't live like this." "Elena, no. Listen to me. I love you. I do. But I can't be the reason you lose everything. And I can't spend the rest of my life wondering when the next person is going to come after me to hurt you. I'll protect you. You can't. Not all the time. We both know that." Tears were streaming down her face now. "And I can't ask you to choose between me and your life. That's not fair to either of us." Roman felt like the ground was falling away beneath him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to leave. I need to go somewhere safe, somewhere far away from all of this." "Don't do this." "I have to." "No, you don't. We can figure this out. We can..." "Roman." She took his face in her hands. "You know I'm right. As long as I'm here, as long as we're together, we're both in danger. And sooner or later, one of us is going to pay the price. I don't want it to be you." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her they could beat this, that love was enough, that he'd burn the whole world down before he let her go. But looking in her eyes, seeing the fear and the love and the resignation there, he knew she'd already made up her mind. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I don't know yet. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knows me. I'll set you up, money, security, whatever you need." "Roman, let me do this, please. Let me know you're safe." Elena nodded, crying too hard to speak. They held each other through the rest of the night, neither of them sleeping, both of them knowing that when morning came, everything would change. And when the sun finally rose over Manhattan, Elena Voss packed a bag, kissed Roman DeLuca goodbye, and walked out of his life. He stood at the window and watched her car disappear into the traffic, taking with her the only thing that had ever made him feel human. The penthouse had never felt so empty, and for the first time in his life, Roman DeLuca, the man who had everything, understood what it meant to have nothing that mattered. The first week without Elena, Roman functioned on autopilot. He went through the motions, meetings, deals, the endless machinery of his empire grinding forward whether he cared or not. His people noticed the change but knew better than to mention it. Marco tried once, asking if Roman was okay, and got a look that could have frozen fire. Roman wasn't okay. He was hollowed out, moving through his days like a ghost in his own life. He'd set Elena up in Malibu, a house on the beach, far from New York, far from Chicago, far from anyone who might connect her to him. He'd wired enough money to last her years, hired private security that would keep watch without being intrusive, made sure she had everything she could possibly need. Everything except him. She called once, 3 days after she left. Roman was in a meeting when his phone buzzed, and he saw her name on the screen. He excused himself immediately, stepped into the hallway with his heart hammering. Elena. Hi. Her voice sounded small, distant. I just wanted to let you know I got here safely. Good. That's good. Silence stretched between them. 3,000 miles and a lifetime of impossible choices filling the gap. How are you? She asked. Roman almost laughed. How was he? He was barely sleeping, barely eating. He'd stood in her room last night, staring at the clothes she'd left behind, and felt like he was suffocating. I'm fine, he lied. You? The house is beautiful. The beach is beautiful. Everything's beautiful. Her voice cracked. I hate it here. Elena, I know this is what needed to happen, but it doesn't make it hurt less. Roman closed his eyes, his free hand pressed against the wall to keep himself steady. I miss you. I miss you too. So much. She took a shaky breath. But we did the right thing, didn't we? He wanted to say no. Wanted to tell her this was the stupidest decision either of them had ever made, that he'd get on a plane right now and bring her home where she belonged. But the memory of finding her in that warehouse, bruised and terrified, stopped the words before they could form. Yeah, he said instead, we did. Okay, I should go. Elena, wait. I can't, Roman. If I stay on the phone, I'm going to fall apart, and I've done enough crying today. Her voice was barely a whisper. Take care of yourself. She hung up before he could respond. Roman stood in the empty hallway, phone still pressed to his ear, and felt something break inside him that he didn't know how to fix. 2 weeks became a month. A month became 6 weeks. Roman threw himself into work with a viciousness that would have been concerning if it hadn't been so effective. He closed deals that had been stalled for months, expanded his operations into new territory, made moves that solidified his position and reminded everyone why crossing him was a death sentence. His empire had never been stronger. He'd never felt weaker. Marco cornered him one night at the penthouse, arms crossed, expression grim. We need to talk. Not in the mood, Roman said, not looking up from the financial report spread across his desk. Too bad. You've been running yourself into the ground for weeks. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? I sleep fine. Bullshit. You look like hell and everyone's starting to notice. The other families are asking questions. They think you're losing your edge. Let them think what they want. Marco slammed his hand down on the desk, making the papers jump. Damn it, Roman, talk to me. This isn't you. You don't fall apart over a woman. I'm not falling apart. Then what do you call this? You sent her away. You made the call. And now you're sitting here drowning in it like some lovesick kid instead of moving on. Roman's head snapped up, and the look in his eyes made Marco take a step back. You think I wanted to send her away? Roman's voice was dangerously quiet. You think I wanted to wake up every morning in a bed that's too empty, in an apartment that feels like a mausoleum? She was kidnapped because of me, Marco. They grabbed her off the street and tied her to a chair and hurt her to get to me. And you want me to just move on like that doesn't matter? What I want is for you to remember who you are. You're Roman DeLuca. You don't let emotions compromise your judgment. Maybe my judgment was compromised from the beginning. Maybe falling for her was the mistake. You don't believe that? Roman looked away. No, I don't. Marco's expression softened slightly. So what are you going to do about it? Nothing. She's safer where she is. Is she? Or are you just telling yourself that because it's easier than fighting for her? The words hit like a physical blow. Roman stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Get out. Boss, I said get out. Marco left, and Roman was alone again, with the silence and the weight of everything he'd lost. In Malibu, Elena was building a life, or trying to. She'd rented a small studio space downtown and started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. The creative outlet helped, gave her something to focus on besides the hollow ache in her chest. She'd made a few acquaintances, people who asked nothing about her past and seemed content with surface-level friendships. She told herself this was better, safer, healthier. She told herself she wasn't dying inside. But at night, alone in the beautiful house Roman had bought her, she'd stand on the deck and watch the ocean and feel like she was slowly disappearing. Like without him, she was becoming less real, less herself, just a shadow going through motions. She'd promised herself she wouldn't call him again. That first call had nearly broken her resolve to stay away. But some nights the silence was so loud she couldn't stand it. It was one of those nights, 6 weeks after she'd left, when her phone rang. Roman's name on the screen. Her hand shook as she answered. Hello? I found them. His voice was flat, emotionless. The people who ordered the hit on you. Elena's blood went cold. What? It took a while to trace it back, but I found them. A family from Boston. They thought grabbing you would distract me from a territory dispute. They were wrong. Roman, what did you do? What I had to do. They're not going to be a problem anymore. She closed her eyes, her free hand gripping the deck railing. You didn't have to tell me that. Yeah, I did. You deserve to know that the people who hurt you paid for it. I don't want revenge. I never wanted revenge. Well, you got it anyway. He was quiet for a moment. How are you? The question was so normal, so mundane after what he'd just told her, that Elena almost laughed. Instead, she found herself answering honestly. I'm lonely. I paint during the day and walk on the beach and try to convince myself this is what peace feels like. But mostly, I just miss you. Elena, don't. Don't tell me this is for the best, or that I'm safer here, or any of the things we've been telling ourselves to make this bearable. Can we just talk? Like we used to? So they did. For 2 hours, they talked about nothing and everything. Elena told him about a seagull that had been harassing her for food scraps. Roman told her about a disastrous meeting where one of his associates had gotten spectacularly drunk and insulted half the room. They talked about movies they'd watched, books they'd read, the weather, the city, the ocean. They talked about everything except the fact that they were both miserable. When they finally hung up, Elena felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because hearing his voice reminded her that this was real, that what they'd had mattered. Heavier because she knew that no matter how many miles separated them, leaving him hadn't stopped her from loving him. If anything, the distance had just made it worse. The calls became a habit. Once a week, sometimes twice, Roman would call and they'd talk for hours. They never discussed getting back together, never mentioned the future or made promises they couldn't keep. They just existed in those conversations like they were stealing borrowed time. Roman told himself it was enough, that hearing her voice, knowing she was safe and happy, or at least safer and working toward happy, was all he needed. But he was lying to himself, and he knew it. 3 months after Elena left, Castellano invited Roman to dinner. It was just the two of them, an expensive Italian restaurant Castellano practically owned. They talked business for a while, shipping routes, political connections, the usual dance of power and influence. Then Castellano set down his wine glass and looked at Roman with the directness of a man who'd known him too long to bother with subtlety. You're in love with her. Roman didn't bother denying it. Yeah, and you sent her away. I did. That was stupid. Roman looked up, surprised. Castellano wasn't known for offering personal opinions. She was a target, Roman said. Being with me put her in danger. Being alive puts everyone in danger. That's not a reason to walk away from something real. Castellano leaned back in his chair. You know what your problem is, Roman? You think power and control are the same thing, but they're not. Power is what you do. Control is what you're afraid to lose. And you've spent so long controlling everything that you forgot how to just let something be. She's safer without me. Maybe. But are you better without her? Roman didn't have an answer for that. Castellano shook his head. I've known you for 15 years. I've seen you negotiate with people who wanted you dead. I've seen you build an empire from nothing, and I've never seen you hesitate. But you're hesitating now. Because I don't know the right move. The right move is the one that doesn't make you wake up in 20 years wondering, what if? The right move is being honest about what you want and then fighting for it. Castellano paused. You want my advice? Stop hiding behind excuses and go get her. Figure out the rest later. Roman stared at his plate, Castellano's words echoing in his head. What if I can't keep her safe? He asked quietly. What if you can? What if she's stronger than you're giving her credit for? What if the two of you together are better than either of you apart? Castellano's expression softened. Life in our world doesn't come with guarantees, Roman. You know that better than anyone, but that doesn't mean you stop living it. That night, Roman stood at the window of his penthouse and stared out at the city lights. He thought about Elena on her beach 3,000 miles away. He thought about the life they'd started to build before fear had torn it apart. He thought about all the reasons they shouldn't be together, and all the reasons he didn't care. Castellano was right. He'd been hiding. Using Elena's safety as an excuse to avoid the terrifying truth that loving her meant accepting he couldn't control everything, that some things were worth the risk. He pulled out his phone and called Marco. I need you to clear my schedule for the next few days. Why? Because I'm going to California. There was a pause. You sure about this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Want backup? No, this is something I need to do alone. When he hung up, Roman felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. Elena was walking on the beach when she saw him. She'd fallen into a routine over the past 3 months. Morning painting, afternoon walk, evening pretending she was fine. The beach was usually empty this time of day, just her and the gulls and the endless stretch of sand and water. So when she saw a figure standing near the water's edge, she almost didn't recognize him. Then the wind shifted and she saw his profile and her heart stopped. Roman. She stood frozen, 40 feet away, trying to process the fact that he was actually here. Not on the phone, not 3,000 miles away. Here. He turned and saw her, and the expression on his face was so raw it hurt to look at. They moved toward each other slowly, like they were both afraid that moving too fast would shatter whatever fragile thing existed between them. When they were close enough to touch, they stopped. Hi, Roman said. Hi. Elena's voice came out barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? I came to see you. Why? Because I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that being apart is working. I can't keep telling myself you're better off without me when every day without you feels like dying. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Roman. Let me finish, please. He took a breath. I sent you away because I was scared. Scared of losing you. Scared of failing to protect you. Scared of caring about something more than I care about staying in control. But the thing is, I already lost you. I lost you the moment I let fear make my decisions. You were trying to keep me safe. I know, but safety without you doesn't mean anything. This whole empire I've built, all the power I've accumulated, none of it matters if I don't have you to come home to. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. I don't know how to make this work. I don't know how to keep you safe and keep us together. But I want to try. I want to stop running from this and start fighting for it. What if it's not enough? What if someone else comes after me? Then we deal with it, together. Because that's what we should have done from the beginning. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not saying there won't be risks. But I'd rather face those risks with you than spend the rest of my life safe and alone. Elena was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I thought you'd move on. I thought eventually you'd realize I wasn't worth all this trouble. Elena. Roman cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. You're worth everything. The trouble, the risk, all of it. I love you, and I'm not walking away again. I love you too, so much. But I'm scared, Roman. I'm scared that wanting you makes me weak, that needing you means I haven't really healed from everything I went through. Wanting someone doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And needing someone you trust, someone who sees you and values you and fights for you, that's not weakness. That's strength. He pressed his forehead to hers. You're the strongest person I know, Elena. You survived hell and came out the other side still able to love, still able to hope. Don't let fear take that away from you. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, pouring 3 months of loneliness and longing into it. Roman kissed her back like she was air and he'd been drowning, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. So what now? Elena asked. Now you come home with me, if you want to. To New York? To wherever we decide home is. It doesn't have to be New York. It doesn't have to be Malibu. It just has to be us. Elena looked at him, this complicated, dangerous, impossibly good man who'd crossed the country to tell her he loved her, who'd given her space when she needed it and shown up when she was ready, who'd seen her at her worst and decided she was worth fighting for anyway. Okay, she said. Okay? Let's go home. Roman smiled, a real smile, the kind she hadn't seen in months, and kissed her again. They didn't leave immediately. Roman had flown out on impulse with no real plan beyond finding Elena and laying his heart bare. So they spent 2 days in Malibu talking through all the things they'd avoided during their phone calls. Elena told him about the nightmares she still had sometimes, about the panic attacks that came out of nowhere, about how hard it was to trust that she deserved good things. Roman told her about the guilt that ate at him, about how he'd replayed the kidnapping 1,000 times trying to figure out what he could have done differently, about how terrified he was of failing her again. They were honest in a way they hadn't been before, stripping away the last of the pretense and showing each other the messy, imperfect truth underneath. And somehow, that honesty made everything feel more solid, more real. On their last night in Malibu, they sat on the deck watching the sunset, Elena tucked against Roman's side. I'm going to sell this place, she said. You don't have to. I want to. It was never really mine. It was just a place to hide. She looked up at him. I'm done hiding. What do you want instead? Elena thought about it. I want to finish my degree. I dropped out when I was with David because he convinced me it was a waste of time, but I was 2 semesters away from graduating with a degree in art history. I want to finish that. Okay, we'll make it happen. And I want to keep working, not at your company. I need something that's mine, not something connected to you, but something where I can use my brain and feel like I'm contributing. Done. And I want to go to therapy, real therapy, with someone who specializes in trauma, because I don't want to carry this weight forever. Roman pulled her closer. Whatever you need, I'm here. What about you? What do you want? He was quiet for a long moment. I want to start stepping back from some of the darker parts of my business. I can't walk away completely. I've got too many obligations, too many people counting on me. But I can start delegating more, focusing on the legitimate operations, building something that doesn't require me to be a monster. You're not a monster. I've done monstrous things. I know. But you're more than the worst things you've done. And if you want to be better, I'll help you figure out how. Roman kissed the top of her head. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. They flew back to New York 2 days later, and when they walked into the penthouse, Elena felt something settle in her chest. It still smelled like Roman's cologne and coffee. The city still glittered through the windows, but this time, walking through the door didn't feel like stepping into someone else's life. It felt like coming home. The next few months were hard, harder than either of them expected. Roman started making changes to his operations, which meant navigating the political fallout from associates who didn't understand why he was suddenly prioritizing legitimate business over the more lucrative illegal ventures. There were tense meetings, veiled threats, moments when Roman had to remind people exactly why crossing him was a bad idea. Elena enrolled at NYU to finish her degree, which meant juggling classes with the job she'd found at a small art gallery in Chelsea. Some days she came home exhausted and overwhelmed, convinced she'd bitten off more than she could chew. Roman would find her staring at textbooks with tears of frustration in her eyes, and he'd sit with her until she felt steady again. They fought sometimes. Real fights, not just disagreements. Elena called him out when he slipped back into old patterns of making decisions without consulting her. Roman pushed back when Elena's fear made her pull away emotionally. But they were learning to fight fair, to air grievances before they festered, to apologize when they screwed up. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and sometimes incredibly difficult, but it was real, and it was theirs. 4 months after Elena came back to New York, they were having dinner at the penthouse when Roman's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "I need to take this." "Go ahead." He stepped into his office and answered. "Castellano, we have a problem." Roman's stomach tightened. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that requires a meeting, all the families, tomorrow night." "What happened?" "I'll explain when you get there. Just be ready for this to get ugly." The call ended and Roman stood there staring at his phone. He'd known this moment would come eventually. The moment when his two worlds would collide again, when he'd have to choose between keeping Elena safe and maintaining his position. He walked back into the dining room. Elena took one look at his face and set down her fork. "What's wrong?" "I have a meeting tomorrow night. It's going to be tense, and I don't know how late it'll run." "Okay, I'll be here when you get back." "Elena, Roman." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I know what I signed up for. I know your life is complicated. I'm not running just because things get hard. This could be dangerous. Then make sure you come home safe." She squeezed his hand. "We're in this together, remember? For better or worse." Roman looked at her. This woman who'd been through hell and still chose to stand beside him, and felt something shift in his chest. Not fear, not doubt, certainty. "Marry me," he said. Elena blinked. "What?" "Marry me. I don't have a ring, and this is probably the worst proposal in history, but I don't want to wait. I don't want to keep wondering if we're going to make it or if something's going to tear us apart. I just want you. Forever. If you'll have me." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You're right. That was a terrible proposal." "Is that a no? Are you kidding? Of course it's a yes." Roman was around the table in seconds, pulling her up and into his arms, kissing her like they had all the time in the world, and none at all. When they finally broke apart, Elena was laughing and crying at the same time. "You know we're both insane, right?" she said. "Absolutely." "Good. Just wanted to make sure we were on the same page." They spent the rest of the night making plans, or trying to. Mostly they just held each other, talking about a future that finally felt possible. And when Roman left for his meeting the next night, Elena stood at the window and watched him go, her hand resting on the glass. "Come back to me," she whispered to the empty room. And hours later, when he walked back through the door, tired but whole, she met him in the hallway and held him like she'd never let go. Because they'd survived the worst of it. The fear, the distance, the violence that had tried to tear them apart. And they were still standing, together. The engagement changed something between them, though neither could quite put their finger on what. It wasn't that they loved each other more. That wasn't possible. But there was a new solidity to their relationship, a sense that they'd stopped waiting for permission from the world and had simply decided to build their life on their own terms. Roman bought her a ring 2 days later. Nothing ostentatious, just a simple platinum band with a single diamond that caught the light every time Elena moved her hand. She cried when he slipped it on her finger, and he pretended not to notice the way his own hand shook slightly. They didn't set a date right away. There were too many things still unsettled, too many loose ends that needed tying up before they could think about planning a wedding. But the promise was there, solid and real, and that was enough. The meeting Castellano had called turned out to be exactly as ugly as promised. A dispute over territory had escalated into threats of violence, and it took Roman 3 hours of careful negotiation to keep the situation from exploding into open warfare. He came home exhausted and angry, and Elena met him at the door with whiskey and silence, knowing sometimes the best thing she could offer was just being there. "One of these days," Roman said, staring into his glass, "I'm going to walk away from all of this." "You don't have to wait," Elena said quietly. "You could walk away tomorrow if you wanted to." "It's not that simple." I know, but it's also not as complicated as you make it. You're choosing to stay because you feel responsible for all these people, all these operations. But at some point, you have to ask yourself if that responsibility is worth what it's costing you. Roman looked at her. What's it costing me? Peace, sleep, the ability to imagine a future that doesn't involve looking over your shoulder. She moved closer, taking the glass from his hand and setting it aside. I'm not saying you should abandon everything tomorrow. I know you have obligations, but maybe it's time to start thinking about an exit strategy. A real one. And do what? Whatever you want. You're brilliant, Roman. You could build a legitimate empire if you put your mind to it. You already have the foundation. It's not about the money. I know. It's about the power, the control, the respect. Elena cupped his face in her hands. But you already have all of that. The people who matter already respect you, and the ones who don't, the ones who only stay in line because they're afraid of you, those aren't the relationships worth keeping. Roman closed his eyes. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, but it's possible. And I'll be here every step of the way. They sat together in the dark, and Roman thought about what she'd said. He'd spent so long being Roman DeLuca, the feared mafia boss, that he'd almost forgotten there were other ways to exist in the world, other versions of himself he could be. Maybe it was time to find out who that person was. 2 weeks after the engagement, Elena graduated. She walked across the stage at NYU in a cap and gown, her hand still bearing the ring Roman had given her, and when they called her name, she heard him cheering from the audience louder than anyone else. Afterward, he took her to dinner at the kind of restaurant where you needed a reservation 6 months in advance. They sat by the window overlooking the city, and Roman raised his glass. To Elena Voss, art history graduate, and the smartest person I know, she laughed. I think there might be some bias in that assessment. Definitely, but I stand by it. They clinked glasses, and Elena felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with Roman and everything to do with herself. She'd finished what she started. She'd taken back something David had convinced her to abandon, and it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd thought was lost forever. Thank you, she said suddenly. For what? For believing I could do this, even when I wasn't sure I could. Roman reached across the table and took her hand. You didn't need me to believe in you. You were always capable of this. I just got to watch. Still, it mattered. She squeezed his hand. You matter. They stayed at the restaurant until it closed, talking about Elena's plans now that she had her degree. She'd been offered a position at the gallery where she worked, assistant curator, with room to grow. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, and that made it perfect. As they walked back to the penthouse through the warm June night, Elena found herself thinking about how far they'd both come. 6 months ago, she'd been convinced that leaving was the only way to keep them both safe, and Roman had been so wrapped up in his need for control that he'd let her go rather than admit he needed her. Now here they were, engaged in planning a future together, having learned the hard way that love without trust was just another kind of prison. What are you thinking about? Roman asked, noticing her silence. How different everything is now. Better or worse? Better, definitely better. She leaned into him as they walked. Harder, too, but the good kind of hard. Roman kissed the top of her head. Yeah, I know what you mean. Summer turned to fall, and with it came changes Roman had been planning for months. He started systematically divesting from the more dangerous aspects of his business, selling off operations that were too risky or too dirty to justify keeping. It wasn't a clean break. Nothing in his world ever was. But it was a start. Some of his associates understood. Others didn't. There were tense conversations, threats disguised as concerns, moments when Roman had to remind people that he was still Roman DeLuca and pushing him was still a bad idea. But he held firm, and slowly, grudgingly, people started to accept that he was serious about stepping back. Marco was one of the few who supported the decision without reservation. About time, he said when Roman told him the plan. You've been killing yourself over this empire for years. Maybe it's time to figure out what else you want from life. I want Elena. I want a life that doesn't involve constantly looking over my shoulder. Then go get it. I'll handle things here. You sure? Marco smiled. Boss, I've been your second for a decade. I know how to run this operation. And frankly, you've been half checked out since she came back anyway. Might as well make it official. It was the truth, and they both knew it. Roman's heart hadn't been fully in the business since Elena walked back into his life. He'd been going through the motions, maintaining control out of habit rather than desire. "Thank you," Roman said, "for everything. Just invite me to the wedding. You're going to be my best man." Marco's expression softened. "Yeah? You mean that?" "Of course I do. You've had my back through everything. I want you standing next to me when I marry her." They shook hands, and Roman felt another piece of his old life shift into place. Not disappearing, just changing shape, becoming something new. In October, Roman surprised Elena with a trip upstate. They drove north on a Friday afternoon, the city falling away behind them as the landscape shifted to rolling hills and autumn colors. Elena had no idea where they were going, and Roman refused to tell her. "Trust me," was all he said. They ended up at a small inn overlooking a lake, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, and the only sounds were wind in the trees and water lapping against the shore. Roman had reserved the entire property for the weekend, which meant they had it completely to themselves. "What is this?" Elena asked as they stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I wanted us to have some time away. No business, no interruptions, just us." "Roman DeLuca, are you going soft on me?" He pulled her close. "Maybe. Is that a problem?" "Not even a little bit." They spent the weekend hiking through the woods, cooking meals together in the inn's kitchen, lying in bed talking until the early hours of the morning. It was simple and quiet, and exactly what they both needed. On their last night, they sat on the dock with their feet dangling over the water, wrapped in blankets against the October chill. "I want to tell you something," Roman said. Elena looked at him, waiting. "When you left, I thought I'd lost the best thing that ever happened to me. And I was so angry. At you for leaving, at myself for letting you go, at the world for making it impossible for us to be together. But mostly I was angry because I realized I'd spent my whole life confusing power with strength. I thought being strong meant never needing anyone, never showing weakness, never letting anyone close enough to hurt me." He paused, staring out at the dark water. "And then you came back, and I realized I had it all wrong. Real strength isn't about being invulnerable. It's about being brave enough to be vulnerable with someone you trust. It's about building something together instead of trying to control everything alone." He turned to face her. "You made me stronger by making me softer, and I know that doesn't make sense, but it's the truth." Elena's eyes were shining with tears. "It makes perfect sense, because you did the same thing for me. You taught me that I could be safe without being small, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that I deserved to take up space and be loved and have someone fight for me." She reached for his hand. "We saved each other, Roman, not from danger or bad men or any of the external stuff. We saved each other from ourselves." Roman kissed her then, soft and slow, and it felt like a promise. Not just of forever, but of right now. Of choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. They set a date for the wedding in November, December 15th, small and intimate. Just their closest people. Elena didn't have much family, and Roman's family was complicated at best, so they decided to focus on the people who actually mattered. Patricia from the consulting firm cried when Elena asked her to be a bridesmaid. Marco threatened to get embarrassingly emotional when Roman asked him to be best man. Castellano, invited as a guest, gave Roman a rare smile and said he wouldn't miss it. The planning was simpler than either of them expected. They didn't want anything elaborate, just good food, good music, and the people they loved. Elena found a dress that made her feel beautiful without being over the top. Roman had a suit tailored that made him look slightly less dangerous and slightly more like someone's future husband. They wrote their own vows, both of them working on them separately and refusing to share until the day of. Elena wrote hers late at night, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, trying to find words that could capture everything she felt. Roman wrote his in his office, staring at a blank page for an hour before the words finally came. 2 weeks before the wedding, Elena came home from the gallery to find Roman sitting on the couch looking shell-shocked. "What happened?" she asked, immediately worried. "I got a call from the FBI." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "They wanted to talk to me about Castellano's organization, Apparently there's a new investigation, and my name came up in some of the preliminary work. Are they charging you with anything? No, not yet anyway. They were fishing, trying to see if I'd cooperate. He looked at her. I told them I was out of that life, that I'd stepped back from operations and wasn't involved anymore. And they're going to keep investigating, but they said if I stay clean and don't give them a reason to pursue me, they'll focus on bigger fish. Elena sat down beside him. What does that mean for us? It means we need to be careful. It means I need to keep my distance from the people I used to work with. It means... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. It means I made the right choice stepping back when I did. You're scared. Yeah, I am. Not of prison. I've made peace with that risk a long time ago, but of losing you, of this investigation dragging you into something ugly. Elena took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. I'm not going anywhere. If this gets messy, we'll deal with it together. That's what marriage is, right? Standing by each other when things get hard. We're not married yet. Close enough. She kissed him. I chose you, Roman. All of you. The past, the present, whatever comes next. I'm not running. He held her tight, and she felt the tension slowly drain from his body. I don't deserve you, he said into her hair. Stop saying that. You deserve to be happy. We both do. And maybe that was the real revelation, Elena thought. Not that they needed each other, but that they deserved each other. Deserved the chance to build something good out of the wreckage of their pasts. Deserved to stop punishing themselves for old mistakes and start believing in second chances. December 15th dawned cold and clear, the kind of winter day where everything felt sharp and bright. The wedding was being held at a small venue in Brooklyn, an old converted warehouse with exposed brick and huge windows that flooded the space with light. Elena got ready with Patricia and a few friends from the gallery, drinking champagne and laughing as they did her hair and makeup. She felt surprisingly calm, no pre-wedding jitters or second thoughts. This was right. She knew it down to her bones. Roman, meanwhile, was pacing his dressing room while Marco tried to get him to sit still. You're going to wear a hole in the floor, Marco said. I'm fine. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. I'm getting married. It's nerve-wracking. Marco laughed. You've negotiated with armed criminals without breaking a sweat, and you're nervous about marrying the woman you love? That's different. Those people couldn't break my heart. The vulnerability in Roman's voice made Marco's expression soften. She's not going to break your heart, boss. She's going to marry you, and you're going to be disgustingly happy together, and I'm going to have to pretend I'm not annoyed by how cute you are. Roman smiled despite himself. Thanks, Marco. Anytime. The ceremony was simple and perfect. Elena walked down the aisle to a string quartet playing something classical and beautiful, and when Roman saw her, his eyes filled with tears he didn't bother hiding. They stood facing each other, hands clasped, and spoke the vows they'd written. Elena went first, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Roman, when I met you, I was broken in ways I didn't even understand yet. I thought the best I could hope for was survival, and happiness felt like something that happened to other people. But you showed me that I deserved more than just survival. You gave me safety when I needed it, space when I asked for it, and love when I was finally ready to accept it. You've never tried to fix me because you understood I wasn't broken. I was just healing. And you've been patient while I figured out who I am without all the fear and control that used to define me. I promise to be your partner, not your possession, your equal, not someone you need to protect from the world. And I promise to remind you, every day, that you're more than the worst things you've ever done. I love you, Roman DeLuca. Not in spite of your complications, but because of them. Because you're real and flawed and trying to be better. And I'm honored to spend the rest of my life watching you become whoever you want to be. Roman had to take a moment to compose himself before he could speak. When he did, his voice was rough with emotion. Elena, I spent most of my life believing that power was the only thing that mattered. That if I was strong enough, ruthless enough, in control enough, I could protect myself from being hurt. And then you sat down on a sidewalk in the rain and cried, and something in me broke open that I'd kept locked up for years. You didn't know who I was, didn't fear me, didn't want anything from me except basic human kindness. And that one moment changed everything. You taught me that real power isn't about control. It's about choosing to be vulnerable with someone you trust. You taught me that love isn't a weakness that makes you soft, it's a strength that makes you brave. And you taught me that I could be more than just the sum of my worst decisions, that I could choose to be better, to do better, to build something that mattered. I promise to choose you every day, in the easy times and the hard ones. When we're sure of ourselves and when we're terrified, I promise to trust you with the truth, even when it's ugly. I promise to fight for us, not just against the world, but against my own worst instincts, when I try to protect you by shutting you out. And I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that you're loved, valued, and seen. I love you, Elena. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'll spend forever trying to deserve you. There wasn't a dry eye in the room by the time they finished. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and when Roman kissed Elena, the small crowd erupted in applause and cheers. At the reception, they danced to a jazz standard that had been playing the first night they'd admitted they loved each other. Roman held Elena close, one hand on her waist, the other clasped with hers, and they swayed together like they were the only two people in the world. Mrs. DeLuca, Roman murmured against her ear. Elena pulled back to look at him, a mischievous smile on her face. Actually, I'm keeping Voss. Roman raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Yeah. I spent too long being someone's possession. I'm not changing my name for anyone, not even you. Hope that's okay. It's perfect. You're perfect. I'm really not. But I'm yours. And I'm yours. They danced until their feet hurt, ate food that was probably too expensive, and laughed until their faces ached. Castellano gave a toast that was surprisingly touching, talking about how rare it was to see real love in their world, and how grateful he was to witness it. Marco's toast was funnier, full of stories about Roman's legendary control freak tendencies and how Elena had somehow managed to knock him off balance. As the night wound down and guests started to leave, Roman and Elena found themselves alone on the venue's rooftop terrace, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline with Manhattan glittering across the water. "We did it," Elena said softly. "Yeah, we did. What happens now?" Roman pulled her close. "Now we live. We build the life we've been talking about. We figure it out as we go. No more running. No more running." Elena tilted her face up to kiss him, and Roman thought about the journey that had brought them here. All the fear and pain and impossible choices. All the times they'd almost lost each other. All the ways they'd had to fight against the world, against circumstances, against their own damaged instincts to get to this moment. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been smooth. But it had been worth it. 6 months after the wedding, Roman officially stepped down from his remaining criminal operations. He sold his shares to Marco and 2 other trusted associates, keeping only the legitimate businesses that had always been his real passion. The consulting firm, the real estate holdings, the investments that would continue to generate wealth without requiring him to compromise his morals. The transition wasn't seamless. There were people who felt betrayed, who accused him of going soft or abandoning his principles. There were threats, both veiled and explicit. But Roman weathered them all with the same cold precision he'd always brought to business, making it clear that stepping back didn't mean stepping down. He was still Roman DeLuca. He just wasn't that Roman DeLuca anymore. Elena graduated from her position as assistant curator to full curator within a year, overseeing exhibitions that got written up in major art publications. She found fulfillment in work that was entirely hers, built on her own merit and talent rather than anyone else's influence. They moved out of the penthouse eventually, finding a brownstone in Park Slope that had a garden and enough space for Elena's art supplies and Roman's home office. It felt less like a fortress and more like a home, with mismatched furniture and photographs on the walls and evidence of actual life being lived. They fought sometimes. Real fights that ended in slammed doors and raised voices before they remembered how to talk to each other like adults. But they always came back together, always chose to work through it rather than run from it. Elena's nightmares became less frequent, though they never completely disappeared. Roman's need for control loosened, though he still had moments where he reverted to old patterns and had to be called out. They both went to therapy, separately and together, and learned how to be better partners to each other and better versions of themselves. 2 years after the wedding, Elena came home with news that made Roman's heart stop. "I'm pregnant." He stared at her, processing the words. We're having a baby." Her eyes were bright with excitement and terror in equal measure. "I know we talked about waiting, but—" Roman kissed her, hard and desperate, cutting off her words. When he pulled back, there were tears on his face. "This is the best news you could have given me." "You're not scared?" "I'm terrified, but in a good way." They had 7 months to prepare, and Roman threw himself into it with the same intensity he'd once brought to building his empire. He read every parenting book he could find, baby-proofed the house within an inch of its life, argued with Elena about names until they finally agreed on Maya if it was a girl, James if it was a boy. When Elena went into labor on a warm September evening, Roman held her hand through every contraction, let her scream at him when the pain got too intense, and cried when he heard their daughter's first cry. Maya Rose was born at 3 in the morning, weighing 7 pounds and already possessing her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Roman held her for the first time and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the world. This tiny person, barely hours old, already meant more to him than anything he'd built or acquired or fought for. She was completely vulnerable, completely dependent, and he would destroy anyone who tried to hurt her. But more than that, he wanted to be worthy of her, wanted to be the kind of father who taught her to be strong without being hard, to be kind without being weak, to trust herself and demand respect from the world. "She's perfect," Elena whispered from the hospital bed, watching Roman cradle their daughter. "She's ours," Roman said, his voice full of wonder. The years that followed were full of the ordinary chaos of raising a child while building careers and maintaining a marriage. There were sleepless nights and milestone moments, first steps and first words, birthday parties and scraped knees and the terrifying rush of unconditional love. Roman proved to be an unexpectedly patient father, content to spend hours on the floor playing with Maya, reading her stories, teaching her to be curious about the world. Elena watched him transform from a man who'd once ruled through fear into someone who got down on his knees to see things from their daughter's perspective and felt grateful every day for the journey that had brought them here. They had another daughter 3 years later, Sophia, named after no one in particular, just because they liked the name, and their family felt complete in a way neither of them had known they needed. Roman never completely left his old world behind. There were still associates who called for advice, situations that required his expertise, moments when he had to tap into the person he'd once been. But it was different now. He wasn't defined by it anymore. He was a husband and father first, businessman second, and former crime boss a distant third. On Maya's 5th birthday, Elena found Roman standing in their daughter's doorway, watching her sleep. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly, slipping her hand into his. "About how different my life could have been. If I hadn't stopped that night, if I'd walked past you like I almost did." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." He squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made." They stood together in the quiet house, listening to their daughters breathe in sleep, and Elena thought about all the broken pieces that had somehow come together to create this whole, beautiful life. She'd survived something terrible and come out the other side stronger. Roman had chosen to be better than his worst instincts. And together, they'd built something neither of them could have created alone. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were no easy answers or perfect solutions. They both still carried scars from their pasts, still had days when old fears bubbled up or old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But they'd learned that love wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, day after day, and choosing each other even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Years later, when Maya and Sophia were older and asking questions about how their parents met, Elena and Roman would sit them down and tell them a simplified version of the story. How they'd found each other in the rain. How they'd almost lost everything. How they'd fought their way back to each other. And the lesson they'd try to impart, though their daughters wouldn't fully understand it until they were older, was this. Real strength isn't about being invulnerable or in control. It's about being brave enough to be vulnerable with people you trust. It's about choosing love even when fear tells you to run. It's about believing that second chances exist, that people can change, that broken things can be made whole again if you're willing to do the work. Roman DeLuca had spent most of his life believing power was the only thing that mattered, that control was safety, that caring about someone was the same as giving them a weapon to use against you. Elena Voss had spent years believing she deserved nothing more than survival, that love meant surrender, that asking for help was weakness, and together they'd proven all of those beliefs wrong. They'd built an empire of two founded on trust and honesty and the radical choice to keep showing up for each other. And while the world outside might have seen a former mafia boss in the woman he'd saved, they knew the truth. They'd saved each other, not from danger or bad men or external threats, but from the prisons they'd built inside themselves. From the fear that they didn't deserve good things. From the belief that they had to face the world alone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Roman took Elena back to the spot where they'd first met. The sidewalk looked different now, gentrified, cleaned up, barely recognizable. But they stood there anyway, hand in hand, and remembered. "If you could go back," Roman asked, "would you change anything?" Elena thought about it, about all the pain and fear and impossible choices, about the kidnapping and the separation and all the times they'd almost given up. "No," she said finally, "because all of it led here, and here is pretty damn good." Roman pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Yeah, it really is." They walked home through the city that had witnessed their beginning, past the life Roman had once led, toward the future they were still building together. And if their story had a message, it was this. Love doesn't erase your past. It doesn't fix all your problems or make you perfect. But if you're brave enough to choose it, honest enough to work for it, and patient enough to let it grow, it can transform you in ways you never imagined. Roman and Elena had learned that lesson the hard way. But standing together, a decade of marriage and 2 beautiful daughters later, they wouldn't have had it any other way. Because the best things in life aren't the ones that come easy. They're the ones you fight for. The ones you choose every single day. The ones that prove over and over again that second chances are real and broken people can build something beautiful together. And that, in the end, is the only kind of empire worth having.